In this video, I'm going to go over the basics of three-point lighting. Three-point lighting is something that we know about from film and television, as it's used very commonly there. And it's just a style of lighting that is, very helpful, and it's called three-point lighting because there are three lights that you use to create it. The first light that you have is something called the key light. So I'm going to turn off all of my lights that are not my key light and just take a look at what it does to my scene. It's adding the main illumination in my scene. It typically comes from above and to the right of the camera, or to the left, but it's not angled very far from your camera, and it's generally above your subjects, but not necessarily too far above. Then you have what's called the fill light. The fill light is a light that is added to your scene. It's generally fairly soft, and it's mostly there to keep all of the really dark shadows from your key light from being cast too severely. So again, this is with my fill light turned on, and let me just turn on interactive region, render region. This is without my fill. So you can see it softens up some of the darker areas on my object. This is especially important with figures. If you're ever filming someone outside in sunlight, and there's the key, which is your sunlight, is casting light down from their eyebrows, you can create these sort of raccoon eyes, these very dark shadows. And so you'll want to add in a fill light to fill in those darker sections and make sure there's still some visual detail there. Now the final light is something called the rim light or the backlight, and it's mostly there to separate the darker edges of your object from the background. It's also sometimes known as a hair light in film and television, and it's really gives that sort of like glowing angel effect from behind. And you can see it's just a very thin line of light up above our objects. And the rim light is often positioned high and behind an object. Well, it's also sort of a special effects light. It's not entirely essential, but it definitely does improve the look of your lighting. I'm going to go over how to recreate this general light setup. Go ahead and follow along. Start by creating a new Cinema 4D scene. Add a simple floor object to your scene, and then go ahead and let's use a sphere. I'm not going to build all of those primitives, so we'll just work with a sphere. I'm going to set its Y position to 100, and I now have a ball that is resting on the floor. Now by default, your Cinema 4D camera is rotated about at a 45-degree angle, and just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to rotate my camera so that I'm facing the front of my object, the XY plane, and I'm going to zoom in a bit to have it fill my frame, rotate so that my horizon line here is at the bottom third of my frame. I'm observing the rule of thirds, another common trick from photography. Now I'm going to add a camera object to my scene now that I've got a nice placement for my camera. And this is going to allow me to take a look at how the lights are placed in relationship to my camera. So I'm adding the camera now, and by default it shows up in the same position as my editor camera. If I was to move my editor camera now, we would see that there is a camera object where that once was. A really good practice if you don't plan on animating your camera and you're satisfied with the framing is to add what's called a protection tag to it. Do that by right-clicking on your camera, going to Cinema 4D tags, and choosing protection. And what that does is it prevents your object from being moved, scaled, or rotated. To make this camera my active view, I have a couple of options. I can click on this icon just to the right of my object, and that will make it my active view. Or I can select my active camera by going to my viewport, clicking on Cameras, Scene Camera, and choosing the camera object. So this is just the basic scene. Now let's get into lighting. Cinema 4D has a bunch of different light types, and I'm not going to get into those in this video. For now, we'll just be using what are called point lights or omni lights. And these are a pretty decent simulation of a a raw or a naked incandescent bulb. When you add a light to your scene, it defaults to a position of 0, 0, 0. So you'll often notice that even though you added a light, things got really dark. And that's because our light is intersecting with our floor and our sphere. And it's not in a good place to add light to our scene. So let's first name this light. I'm going to name my light Key. And that makes it the primary light in my scene, at least in terms of my mind. I'm now going to go into my four-way view so that I can see how my camera and my light relate to each other. And as we can see in the side view right here, the light is currently below my camera. So I want to move it up above my camera and a little bit to the right. Now, if you look online, there's going to probably be some tutorials and diagrams from photography sites with angles and so forth, but personally I just sort of eyeball it. So this is my key light. When I render, I get this. Now the ball looks like it's floating, and that's because it doesn't have a shadow right now. So I'm going to select my key light, and I'm going to add what's called an area shadow. Now, area shadows are slow to calculate, so don't use them if you've got a really intense deadline, but they're really wonderful because they give you this really sharp edge at the base of a shadow, and it feathers as you get further away. So those are my favorite kind of shadows. Again, the key light has an intensity of about 100%. It's the brightest light in your scene. And often it's got a warm color. It depends on the effect you're trying to create. I'm going to duplicate my key light now by holding down the control key on my keyboard and dragging. Notice now that when I render, my scene is overexposed. I've got too much light in my scene. So I can solve this by moving my key light, my second key light, somewhere else so that it's not quite so overexposed. But it's still not ideal. So I'm going to rename my key light here to Fill so I know what I'm trying to do with it. And fill lights in general are only there to, again, lighten up the darkest part of a shadow. So set the intensity here to something fairly low, no higher than 40%. Then go into your four-way view, and the placement for your fill light should be almost directly opposite your key light in front, top, and side. And it's really there to pick up, again, those darker shadows of your key light. And you can play around with it interactively to get a good sense. So I'm going with something like this. Now, in the real world, a fill light would almost always be something like a softbox. You want really soft, diffuse lighting coming from a fill. You don't want to cast any hard shadows or have bright highlights here. Now, last but not least, yeah, and let's just give that a render. So now we can see we've got another slight shadow being cast by a fill, but those really dark shadows are now gone. I'm now going to add a rim or a backlight to pull off the edge of this object from the background. To do that, I'm just going to duplicate my key because it's nice and bright, and I'm going to name this rim or backlight, whatever makes more sense to you. And as the name backlight might imply, I'm going to move it to the back of my object, and I'm going to move it over to the side a bit. Notice that I'm starting to create a slight halo around the edge of my object based on its placement. So now when I render, I get something like this. Now the problem with what we're seeing right here is that we've got a lot of really intense shadows and a lot of really intense lighting. And this is why it's so great to be working in 3D as opposed to the real world. This is every photographer's dream, is to be able to say, oh, I want light here, but I don't want to create a nasty shadow. And what we can do is turn off shadows on our fill light. So to get rid of that shadow over there, I'm going to take my fill, and I'm going to turn the shadow from area to none, and give it another render. It's a little bit better. Another thing, like I mentioned before, is that your fill light should be really diffuse. You don't want any highlights. So we're going to turn off specular on our fill light. So now when we render, we lose this second highlight here. And I'm going to turn on interactive render region so I can see the effects of my changes in real time. To turn on interactive render region, you press and hold on your render button and choose interactive render region. And you can just resize that box to cover this part of your object. Now, my rim light is really here to pull my object off the background, but it's also having this unfortunate side effect of casting this really intense shadow. Now, if this was a close-up on this part of the sphere, we wouldn't have to worry about these shadows on the ground, but it's a wide shot. So let's tell the rim light not to add any light to our floor. And we can do that by clicking on the Scene tab of our rim light. And in here, there is something that says Exclude, which means we're not going to include something. We're going to say it can't play our reindeer games, as it were. We're going to exclude the floor from this, and notice that we no longer have that really intense, bright floor or those intense shadows. And our rim light, in our General tab if we want, we can also turn off Specular to get rid of that nasty highlight that it might be adding. So it's just a very soft bit of light here. Now that's the basics of three-point lighting. If you want to play with color, I would say that your key light, a good starting point would be a nice soft yellow. Your fill light, generally a cool blue. And your rim light is often can be used sort of as a special effects light, so you could even do something wacky like a pink or something like that. And that just adds a little bit more visual interest to your scene. If you don't like the look of the highlights, just add a material to your object wherein you turn off specular. Drag that onto your sphere, and now it's a diffuse looking sphere. That is the basics of three-point lighting. There's a lot more to learn on lighting, of course, and a really great resource is, you can use all of the great resources for traditional film, television lighting, and just apply those concepts to 3D.